Welcome to How to Start Up, a podcast for anyone starting or running a company. Hosted by me, Juliet Fallowfield, founder of PR communications consultancy Fallowfield & Mason, where we teach you how to do your own PR. When starting and scaling a business, it's important to consider the impact of your supply chain on not only the planet, but also people. 88% of respondents to an open tech survey said they prioritise buying from companies that have ethical sourcing strategies in place. And 64% of 18 to 24-year-olds surveyed said that they would never buy from a company again if they were accused of working with unethical suppliers. In this episode, I speak with Emilie Holmes, founder of Good & Proper Tea, the tea brand committed to doing things properly. Having founded her business in 2012, Emilie has invested considerable time and money in making sure her business positively impacts the communities within her supply chain. With many companies wanting to better understand the implications of their suppliers' actions, Emilie shares her advice on auditing a supply chain, supporting the communities you work with, and achieving profitability more sustainably. Hi, Emilie. It's great to have you on How to Start Up today. It'd be wonderful if you could kick off with an introduction as to who you are and a bit about the business that you started.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I am Emilie Holmes, now Forsyth, and I'm the founder of Good & Proper Tea. We are have just crossed the 10-year mark. So I think we can still call ourselves a startup, but I'm not totally sure. We are a specialty tea company based in London, on a mission basically to show people how great tea can be. So we source single origin teas from around the world, and we ensure that the customer, not only have we got great leaves, but that the customer can brew the best possible cup at the end of that. So we've got a really kind of long and varied history with tea in the UK. And so we're trying to inject a bit of new life into the category and give people a delicious cup. So we supply cafes, restaurants, hotels, and bars and offices. That's kind of the lion's share of our business. But we also have obviously a very loyal and growing customer base at home, tea drinkers at home, as well as a small retail presence.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, because from the outside you see this amazing tea brand. But the reason we wanted to chat to you today was because the season's around sustainability and the fact that new businesses and entrepreneurs have an opportunity to start as they mean to go on. They have a blank canvas. If they're informed as to the things that they should do starting, they don't then have to unpick their bad habits later. And we wanted to chat to you about supply chain and how you're looking after all of the different people involved in your business. So it'd be great if you could go into a bit more detail around that. Why was it important to you to start with?
So why was it important to me? I 10 years ago sounds like such a long time, but I think it was totally, if I'm totally honest, it was completely obvious to me that if I was going to start a business, that we had to do things right from the outset. I don't know whether, I can't claim that was because I was really well versed in sustainability issues, or because I had any particular kind of passion or extra sort of feeling like I needed to sort of save the world, or any particular allegiance to any particular problem in the world, other than all of them, other than just wanting to be a good person, doing the right thing. And to me, doing business right was just a no-brainer. I think it just always had to be that way. I probably was slightly affected by a few things. I grew up in India. I spent about 4.5 years in India. So I'd been to tea estates. So I knew that there were people and craft and a lot of work that went into the leaf. So I think that probably played into it a little bit. I have family members that work in kind of both social and environmental kind of sectors. So again, I think that was probably, a little bit in the air. But to be totally honest, I think it was just my approach, and what has now become our business approach is doing things properly. Doing things properly has kind of been this ethos that's underpinned everything we've done from the off. Doing things right by the planet and by people was just another part of doing it right. So every step of the way, every decision we've made has just been like, right, okay, well, what's the right way to do this? And in doing that,
even your brand name, obviously.
Yeah, but also down to, how we pick up the phone to customers and how we deal with issues. It's supposed to be absolutely everything. And so I think it was probably more an approach of wanting to do everything right and honestly and authentically. And it's worth noting as well that the first kind of 3-4 years of my business, in fact, up until 3 years ago, we had a physical presence. So I started in the van. I was out, literally face to face with customers. We then had pop-ups and tea bars and physical presence. And that means you're literally interfacing with a customer every day. And that's, I think, probably makes it even more important, where you think honesty and authenticity are big part of it. And when you apply that to sustainability, it obviously just needs to be, well, what are the things that matter? How do we do it right? How's everyone else doing it? What approaches are there that we could adopt? And then finding our way through that. So it wasn't necessarily, as I say, a kind of, I'm passionate about saving the planet. Like, obviously I've become more passionate over time, but it's more that I was just determined that we were going to do things right across the board. And obviously when it came to sustainability, then that had particular implications.
So something I often say is that if you're sustainable, it doesn't necessarily mean you're good. If you do something repeatedly, you're sustaining it. So you could murder with someone with an axe every day and you're a sustainable axe murderer. It doesn't mean you're a good person. So I always struggle from a wordsmith perspective, the definition of sustainability. And actually you saying, well, we wanted to do it the right way. You have that gut feeling in you that says this is the right way of doing it. How do you sense check that?
I think I've tried not to use gut feeling as the truth, because
really,
I mean, obviously gut feeling comes into it, but I think particularly with, I mean, I couldn't agree more about the word sustainability. So it's also become this kind of complete catch-all when no one understands what it means. I think it's a really, really complex and confusing topic that involves so many different parts. But as you say, really it should just mean, by doing business with this community or buying tea in this way, is that a sustainable practice for the world, for the people living there, etc., for the business? If we can't sustain ourselves, then obviously there's no point either. So it's sort of simple, but it is also incredibly complicated. And yes, we use gut feel. Obviously, if things feel, I think I can probably say hand on heart that we've never had to sort of question morality of things we're doing. So gut obviously does come into it, but I think more, particularly with the environment and with social issues, I think it's actually getting really into the kind of gritty detail of trying to understand it. And quite often I kind of do little sprint projects where it'll be kind of, right, we really need to understand what is out there now from a packaging perspective, and actually, is compostable packaging good, or is it actually not as good as recyclable packaging? That's just one example of a huge headache of complexity and misinformation and customer confusion, and almost without exception, you come out of that kind of, immersing yourself in the detail and talking to lots of people going, right, well, there's no right answer. It's all a learning curve. And the big caveat to all of this conversation is, I am by no means an expert. And I think we are very much learning as we go. And I live in fear permanently, probably in a positive way, of discovering that actually the way we've been doing it is actually not the best way, and we need to adjust that and do better. And I think probably I've now accepted that the right way is just to keep learning, keep listening, keep stress testing and talking to people in all, and iterate and just try and be a little bit better each time. And that's all you can really do. And I don't think there's no perfect in any of these issues, because if you're saving the planet, you're usually affecting some community somewhere. If you're, there's a trade-off at all points.
I love the fact you're looking at it from every single touch point of the business, whether it's how you pick up the phone to your supply chain. But in terms of you're focusing in a bit on your supply chain, is there any advice you'd give to new founders as to how to identify a good, in inverted commas, supply chain?
I think, again, a lot of it is to do with talking to lots of people, getting recommendations. I'm slightly fortunate in the sense that by virtue of the kind of the quality of the product we're buying, quite often we're already in a space whereby we're paying a certain premium for our teas, which means that the prices we're paying are giving us access to teas from better suppliers. It also means that we are, again, by virtue of the quality we're buying, which is a very small proportion of those farmers' crops, we're paying well above a fair trade price. So there's kind of lots of things that I feel like are probably easier for me because of the sort of part of the sector we're in. But I think at the beginning, certainly I did a huge amount of sponging, of just talking to everyone in the industry. I think knowing you're naive when you start and knowing that you don't know any of the answers is a great asset, because you kind of go, this is what I want to do. I really want to understand it better. Is there any chance you could have a cup of tea with me and we can just talk about it? Or who's the best person I should be speaking to about sourcing tea from Taiwan? I mean, when I first started, I remember an amazing lady who is a real kind of, she's now a tea historian, but she knew a huge amount and had been in the industry for a very long time. And I went to her kind of, cap in hand and said, this is what I want to do, but help, where do I start? And she basically in the end gave me a sort of black book to like, these are the people you need to talk to. And, over time that's evolved.
But you had the confidence to put your hand up.
Yeah, because who doesn't want to share knowledge to someone that knows less than them? And finding out what issues there might be in your particular industry that you need to be avoiding.
So investing that time in being informed.
Yeah, I think so.
Lots of guests have said that is like being vulnerable enough to put your hand up and ask for advice. You don't need to feel like you have to have all the answers at your fingertips to start
Definitely
with.
not.
Because you are a startup. There's lots of things you're not going to know about lots of categories.
Well, yeah, and I think I'm sure you are too, but I'm on so many WhatsApp groups and they are obsessively asking each other advice. And it is amazing because there's no better advice than, oh my goodness, like my packaging supplier is fallen through or they've gone bust, help, who can help? And someone else, another business owner like you's recommendation, I mean, there doesn't come stronger than that in terms of kind of, they work with them, they know they're good, let's pick up the phone. And
it's the best word of mouth.
Yeah, 100%. And actually sustainability, I feel like, is particularly good at that because there's a really great word I heard recently, green hushing, where everyone's so afraid to talk about it because they might get it wrong that no one talks about it.
They don't want to be accused of greenwashing, so they just don't
exactly. And everyone thinks that you're supposed to know all the answers. And actually, I think the more we can kind of open that conversation, share, we're doing B Corp, which means we're talking to loads of businesses that are doing B Corp. And that's amazing because it's literally like, oh my God, this is really difficult. How did you approach the governance section? Or what are you doing in this space? And sharing those learnings is a really good kind of...
And the whole ethos of B Corp is that you set the tone of how to do business better so other people can copy you in the future. They absolutely promote that of you are changing business, so you're setting an example of doing it better so other people can come along behind you and look at that as the thing to aim for.
Yeah. Proudly copy. It's definitely the kind of ethos, yeah. And
when you become certified, you're part of the Bee Hive, so you're part of this amazing hive of incredible companies that will all support each other. That mentorship, and in fact, on one of those WhatsApp groups this morning, I was thinking, this is mutual mentoring. In fact, we all need a mentor, we all need a coach, but the fact that we're all mentoring each other is really exciting and really efficient as well.
Yeah, definitely, because we've all got something we can teach each other.
If ever, I mean, I was Chanel trained, so I was like, we're number one. And now I'm like, I have so much to learn about so many things, but I quite like it, never a dull moment.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's the best thing about being in business, right, is that you can learn those things and put them into action today, not kind of wait for a whole culture to change. You can take them and learn from them and adapt.
And another reason to do it as you're starting rather than try and unpick a juggernaut later on. Definitely. And actually I was going to ask, do you think it took a lot more of your time to go this route? But presumably because you had never done it any other way, you can't really compare?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that doing things right takes longer and costs more, to be honest. I think there are things coming into kind of carbon and different parts of a sustainability journey that can sometimes have a financial upside, but I think for the most part the truth is that yes, things sadly do often cost a bit more and they are harder because there are less suppliers.
It takes more time to find, and
Definitely.
Time is obviously a cost in its own right.
That's exactly it. I think there absolutely is that side of things, but I think it's impossible to measure the value of that investment, sadly, other than knowing it is clearly a long-term brand and business investment that is no doubt the right one.
And I feel in today's age, it underpins most new businesses that we're seeing coming through. And the fact that actually it shouldn't and it should, but it does translate into the marketing and the communications that if you're acquiring customers to your business, they're going to want to know your brand values. And if you can actually have those proof points to say, well, this is why we do this and this is how we do that, and that loyalty. So the return will come. You just can't, like editorial, you can't actually put your finger on it and say, we have made this much money because we did that.
Exactly, which is true of all brand.
Yes, thank you.
It's exactly the same as all brand things. And actually, I think you're right that it's such an obvious marketing tool, and sadly, that has meant there's a lot of greenwashing, which means I'm sure if you took a whole load of tea companies, so a lot of the blurbs would sound identikit. It's kind of like we all know the buzzwords, we're all saying the same thing, and then therefore it's about that authenticity and that substance that sits behind it, which I think is a little bit, particularly with sustainability, is about kind of really showing underneath the bonnet of the business. You know, it's kind of saying like, we're figuring it out. This is what we're doing, sharing where you're at, sharing where you want to get to. All of that, I think, is such a big part of getting that really true sense of kind of responsibility across your customers. It's very easy to have 5 badges that you can chuck on a pack. We can talk separately about certifications because they are problematic in their own right. And I'm not a huge believer in a lot of them. B Corp is probably one of the first ones that's come along where I think, wow, that is so comprehensive, so challenging, and so kind of game changing, and also iterative. Again, it's not something you could just get. You have to then continue to keep it and continue to work on it and continue to improve, and therefore is a lot more valuable, I think, than just kind of a few things that are stuck on the front of the pack.
Well, actually, on that, are there things that people in your category should go after, or things that you'd recommend they avoid?
I mean, tea is really specific, but I think one that sits across lots of food and drink is fair trade. I don't know how much I want to go into the true detail of it because I know it's very controversial and probably a bit political as well. But I just think that no certification is foolproof, and a lot of them are flawed, not because they are necessarily, haven't set out to do a great thing, but they can't be perfect. They can't kind of, B Corp, as I say, I think is so comprehensive that it's changing the way a business works, which is slightly different to saying I've ticked a load of boxes. And basically, particularly with the tea supply chain, there are things on the ground are often very different to what we want them to be or how we perceive good to look like from here. I was at Origin in India a month ago, and it was so interesting. You always go with all these questions and you come back with completely different questions because you suddenly realize the questions you're asking are all the wrong questions because actually the issue is not this, it's this. And I think there's no substitute for kind of really knowing what the actual issues are and trying to understand it in your own head to then kind of pick your way through it. And sometimes those certifications can actually be more problematic for the supplier at the end rather than protecting them.
I was going to ask, given that your supply chain is global, how do you interrogate it?
We source from 13 different regions. We now have a purchasing partner, which has been hugely helpful. I used to kind of buy it all myself, and I think now that we're buying obviously much bigger volumes, that still is, but would also be terrifying. And now I feel like I have a partner in that. So that, not only is helpful from a selection perspective when we're selecting teas for the year, it means I've got someone to do that with, but I think also it provides a level of reassurance that we're both accountable for auditing that supply chain. We both need to visit the supply chain or make sure that one of us has. We both kind of have supplier codes of conduct and surveys and things that are unique to our business. And a lot of that kind of real process is stuff that we've only relatively recently put in place. We've kind of always had it informally, and things like B Corp and kind of working with slightly bigger customers who have required sort of slightly more paperwork around those things that we were already doing in a certain way but needed to kind of put structure around. That's been stuff we've put in place, and it's been really helpful. But I think there's no real better thing than just talking to the people themselves and understanding what the issues are and how it can be a mutually beneficial arrangement, and how, us growing can benefit your suppliers and all of that. But
do you love visiting and traveling to see where it's sort of going up the pipeline for you and seeing the source and seeing the actual crops?
Yeah. It's the best thing ever. I thought I was going to be doing it all the time. And COVID certainly put a stop to that. No, it's kind of now back in sort of top of the agenda. And I mean, we came back from this trip just completely full of, there's just nothing like it. Nothing like it, just because it's amazing anyway. As you can imagine, visiting tea growing regions is pretty magical. But spending days and days with the people you're working with, understanding what makes them tick, what issues they've got that you actually hadn't even really realized, how therefore, because I think it's very easy to sit in the UK and think this is what would be good for our suppliers, or, this is what our customers want to see. They want to see a very small, farmer, crafting a crop, and that might be a sort of vision that they have in their head of what a good supplier looks like. but it's slightly romanticized. And in reality, it's kind of understanding what their challenges are, which might be in the example of Darjeeling where we just were, it was like, the young don't want to work in the fields anymore. And that's a massive issue. And how can they attract more people back to the fields? And climate change, meaning, the crops are unreliable, the weather's unreliable, and there's flooding, and therefore the women can't drop their children at school and then get back to do their work. And, there's all sorts of really sort of specific issues that you just can't audit away. You need to just understand it and then see how you can work together on it, or, at least understand it, if nothing else.
So you seeing clients request information about that element of the business?
Yeah, I think, again, I would like to say that they want it more authentically, but the truth is that a lot of them, particularly kind of in the business to business world, I think a lot of it is box ticking as well, because you're a supplier of theirs and therefore you're part of their supply chain. So they want to check in terms of risk, but they also want to check in terms of ticking their boxes that they're doing the right thing. So there can be a little bit of frustration where you're like, you're not really interested. You just want to know I'm doing it right, which, is fine. And obviously, hopefully we can provide them what they need to be reassured that we're a trustworthy supplier. I think it's our direct customers, so kind of the customers at home that, and the people that are kind of on the receiving end of our brand who hopefully really appreciate that detail and that kind of interest that we share with them. And I'm sure, in a way, if you're doing your job right and you're kind of translating your values in everything you do, the fact is that your sustainability page probably won't be the most read page on your website, but hopefully they're getting through all of the way you talk about things and the way you share your journey and share your trips and share those problems that your suppliers might be having. I think hopefully then that would come through, and therefore they trust that you're doing the right things beneath all that.
And when you're doing your business planning and you're doing forecasting and mapping, do you have that sustainability roadmap within your business plan?
So it's a really good question. And we have a sustainability roadmap, which we set up last year, which was a really exciting moment, I think, again, for sort of like, we've been doing lots of these things already, but we've never had a framework, and we've never kind of held ourselves accountable for any particular milestones. I think probably the changing factor there for us was carbon, because I think carbon is the way carbon is approached, and obviously with net zero targets, means that there is this kind of roadmap mentality where it's like, how are we going to get to an end goal that's very specific, it's very data driven. And in a way, that's quite a good thing, because I feel like if we can all approach sustainability in that way and say, right, we want to eliminate plastics at X point, or whatever the particular problem in your kind of business might be, having those goals and those milestones, I think, is probably a great thing. So we set that up last year, and as part of B Corp, obviously we've made the commitment and kind of changed the structure of our business for B Corp. We're sort of still very much in the process, so we're being audited as we speak, and I think moving forward, our impact report will be part of our. So, for example, at our year end, which is next month, for the first time, the impact report will be part of our kind of end of year report, which is quite exciting.
Yeah. Well, it makes it accountable, and you've put it down on paper legally that you've changed the way your company works. And we're being audited as well. So we'll keep in touch as and when we find out. But I think it's that I did this when I started the company. I put it straight on LinkedIn that I was doing my own thing, so I couldn't go back. I published it. It was public knowledge that I was self-employed, and it meant I couldn't undo it. I couldn't chicken out. And I think B Corp, it's a big brother, and it's looking and it's sharing best practice, it's helping, but it's also keeping you incredibly accountable. But one guest, I think a couple of episodes ago, we were discussing saying you do an annual tax return or corporation or VAT return or whatever, you legally have to do these things. Why isn't ESG not a legal requirement? It feels like unless you've got a really sort of hard stop, lots of people were like, oh, well, we tried, we did a kind of all right job, but we don't actually have to do it. But I think that's where your gut feeling and that determination of it's the right thing to do, and this is our business, and you'll have a team around you that will be holding you accountable as well. And I know for sure it matters to my team what we're doing and how we're doing it. But what you said about green hushing and greenwashing, it's fascinating, because the press are so aware of businesses trying to greenwash them, and they're sick to death of getting a pitch about something being sustainable. It's like, well, what's your 10-year commitment to this charity project, or like, what are you actually doing that's affecting change? So yeah, it'd be interesting times.
I'm actually glad to hear that you're saying that people are fed up, because I sort of feel like people are still surprisingly and disappointingly tick boxy.
Yeah.
Where, as I say, sometimes we get asked questions that I feel like they don't quite really even care about the answer. And you sort of feel like, I kind of want you to really care what I'm saying.
Yeah, we've done all this work behind the scenes.
Yeah, whereas they're like, okay, great. You've got the thing, and you're like, well,
do you think that's because they sort of expect that it's there, that most businesses, they're incorrectly assuming that most businesses have an ESG framework behind them, and they take it for granted?
Maybe. I mean, I feel like in my kind of ecosystem, which is food and drink startups, I think it is still a very new thing. Like, it's built in one sense. The brands quite often are very mission focused from the beginning, but at the same time, you can get a free carbon footprint off the internet, and you don't really have to try that hard. So there's a real disparity between kind of really wanting to get into it and making it a big part of what you're doing, and just making sure that you've got all the stuff there that sort of vaguely says you're doing the right thing. So I think it's still a new world, and I think carbon as well, I think, is a really, when we started doing our carbon stuff, I was fascinated by it, because I was fascinated by how many companies had popped up to help you do your carbon footprint, but also incredibly frustrated as ever, which I'm afraid is always the way with anything ESG, it seems, where there's like two schools of thought and they're completely different. And, and packaging is the starkest example always, but carbon was pretty much the same, where it was like, well, hang on, you can do a product footprint or you can do a business footprint, and no one really sort of talks about which one you're talking about. It's all very well saying, great, let's put carbon footprints on packaging. A customer has no idea what a good carbon footprint looks like versus a bad one, so that's not helpful. And also, you can measure it in different ways, and you can talk about how great you are, but actually you can talk about only your scope 1 and 2, and they're only really your kind of commuting. So I could not talk about any of my supply chain and the fact that I'm, shipping teas across the world, because I'm an SME and I don't have to talk about that yet. So there's, it's just so complicated.
The consumer is still very ignorant as to what they're missing.
Very ignorant, which I think, again, is why our approach has always been, rather than kind of having total imposter syndrome about, oh God, I don't know enough about sustainability, is just to be permanently trying to learn more and talk to people and keep abreast of what's happening, and then do what you think feels right. To me, it felt right to overinvest and to actually measure our scope 3, which is 90% of our emissions. In fact, 49% of our emissions are you boiling the kettle at home. What am I supposed to do about
that? Well, especially when you're a tea brand.
Well, yeah. But yeah, that's, so we immediately put on pack, please only boil the amount of water you need.
So you're informing and helping and educating. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. We can put our efforts into that. But I find it amazing that I could have just talked about the fact that I use 100% renewable energy supplier and my team, don't commute loads.
And you can leave out the bad stuff. But that's where I feel like that transparency of B Corp, or another way of doing it, of here's all of it, and if you want to dig into it, it's there. So something that we do is, the previous guest from the previous recording has a question for you, and then we'll ask you a question for the next guest. So Ginny, who writes around sustainability for Grazia and The Telegraph, she's a journalist, and her question, and I think I caught her in one of those weeks where it's just like, the world is falling apart. She is like, on the days that you want to pack it all in and go and search for a job on LinkedIn with permanent employment, with paid holiday pension, bonus, paid notice periods, all the trappings, what do you say to yourself?
Usually I want to just stack shelves or like paint by numbers. I just want to do something that has no impact.
Well, something you can deliver. Something that's tangible. I think that's quite a recurring theme, that friends are like, I just want to do something that's finished and done, and I can walk away and I can see it. So I sort of replastered a wall and repainted, and it's like, it's done.
Incredibly satisfying. Yes, it's not this living, breathing thing that always has to be better.
Constant, and a constant whack-a-mole.
Yes, constant whack-a-mole. I mean, whack-a-mole is the best analogy for business ever. Yeah. But no, I can relate to all of those things heavily. What do I say to myself? I think I feel like I know now, after 10 years of those ups and downs, I think I basically would take myself for a run. because quite often you just need, we all know the difference between one day being just such a rubbish day and the next day being like, oh, I'm so pumped, this is so exciting, like, I can't sleep because I'm so excited about all the things we're doing. And that can be such a series of different things that feed into one or the other. And for me, going on a run is always the way to extract that good one and pull myself out of the bad one, because usually if I'm thinking, like we said at the very beginning, I'm excited, I'm creative, I'm thinking of all these great things, and usually I'm able to work through a tricky moment as well. So that's what I would just go for a run quick.
Well, get away from the laptop.
Get away from the laptop. Yeah.
What question would you like to ask the next guest coming on?
Ooh.
Any founder pain point that you're like, you know what, I really like to hear someone else's perspective on that?
Where do you turn to when you're in one of those real crisis moments? And it might be not necessarily a personal crisis kind of with, the overwhelm or whatever, but more when you've got a really tricky predicament or a big decision. For me, one of the worst things about being your own boss is you don't really have anyone, every now and again saying, oh, you really nailed that presentation. Or like, I think you need to work on this, because we all want to improve, but we have no one telling us we're good or bad.
But I was going to ask if there's any last golden nugget pieces of advice you'd like to offer somebody who's either thinking about starting a business or starting a business or running a business around setting up sustainability within it.
I think don't be overwhelmed. Just do something. Just kind of head down, pick one thing first, try and work out how it works, decide how you're going to do it, find your own way. Don't necessarily do what you think everyone else is doing, particularly in terms of sustainability.
Yeah.
Just start somewhere and do what you think is right, and then it will be authentic and right by you. So that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much for your amazing advice and inspiration. It's given me a pep of onwards. So I really appreciate your time.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
If you'd like to contact Emilie, you can find all of her details in the show notes, along with a recap of the advice that she has so kindly shared. Thank you for listening to How to Start Up. I hope these conversations offer you some confidence, encouragement, and reassurance that you're on the right track. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I'd be so appreciative if you were to rate, review, and subscribe, as it will really help other people starting a company discover it. Of course, if you've got any questions at all on PR communications or podcasting, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me, because at Fallowfield & Mason, we love supporting startups.